Hey guys, so we're going to keep talking about commas today. We already reviewed a couple ways that we have already talked about using commas, mainly when we list items in a series, okay, or when we have two independent clauses that we're joining together with the fanboys. But those are not the only situations where we want to use commas, so I wanted to talk about two more common situations where we might see commas. Okay, so go ahead and scroll down your paper. Go down until you see where it says comma use in bold and underlined. Okay, that's where we're going to be starting back up. All right, so the first situation where you want to use a comma is when you have an introductory word, phrase, or dependent clause. And basically all that means is that you begin your sentence with a word, phrase, or clause, okay, and are just introducing it that way. Okay, so let's look at some examples. However, comma, I did not want to go to the zoo. So when you start with transitional words like that, however, in conclusion, in summary, first, second, third, you want to put a comma after that word. Okay, same with transitional phrases like in conclusion, in summary, in contrast. Okay, you want to put a comma after that. So that goes to our next one. In conclusion, comma, building a water park in Durham is a great idea. All right, now we also use them when we begin our sentences with dependent clauses, which we've talked about before. So when you start your sentence with a dependent clause, you want to put a comma after it. So here's our example. After I studied for the test, comma, I passed it. Okay, so we want to put a comma whenever we introduce our sentence with a word, phrase, or dependent clause. Okay, so let's look at a few examples here, and we're going to add commas to those sentences as needed. So let's look at my first one. Number one, when I graduate from high school, I plan to go to college. So I began this sentence with a dependent clause, when I graduate from high school. Notice it starts with that awubis word, so it can't stand alone. Okay, so that means I need to put a comma right after that dependent clause. Okay, now let's look at number two. Yes, that is a good idea. All right, I started with an introductory word, yes. Okay, so that doesn't really go with my clause, that is a good idea. Okay, it's just kind of by itself. It's just introducing my sentence. So I'm going to say yes, comma, that is a good idea. All right, now what I want you to do, look at sentences 3, 4, and 5, and I want you to go ahead and add commas as needed to those three sentences. Each one is going to need one comma. Okay, so take a second and do that. All right, so hopefully we got a chance to do that. Let's check those. Number 3, of course you will need good grades to get into a college of your choice. So I started with that introductory phrase, of course. Okay, so I'm going to put a comma after that. And notice, of course here is kind of separate from the you will need good grades clause. Okay, so that introductory word or phrase will always be separate from the rest of the sentence. Okay. All right, number 4, since you are a good student, I know you'll have no problem. So I started out with that dependent clause, beginning with my awubis word since, okay? So that means I need to put a comma after that dependent clause. All right, number 5, in addition, your involvement in extracurricular activities is important. So I started with that transitional phrase, in addition, okay? So I'm going to put a comma right after that. Okay, so just to recap, anytime you introduce your sentence, the word, phrase, or clause, you want to put a comma after it. Okay? All right, now let's look at my next situation where I'm going to use commas. Okay, and that is down here. It says number 2. And that's when we want to separate out interrupting words or expressions. So basically, this is if you interrupt yourself in the sentence, okay? You want to put commas around that interruption to separate it from the rest of the sentence. Otherwise, it gets really confusing when you're reading. You'll notice what I mean when we look at the examples. All right, so example, have you, comma, by the way, comma, ordered lunch yet? Okay, so my actual clause here is, have you ordered lunch yet? Okay, that's the sentence there. But I interrupted it with this little phrase, by the way. Okay, so if I was saying this to you, I'd be like, have you, by the way, ordered lunch yet? And notice how when I said it, okay, I kind of separated out the by the way. I paused on either side of that by the way, okay? And you'll see that in the writing too. That comma just sets it off from the rest of the sentence. All right, let's look at our next one. I would like, I think, to go to medical school. So I put a comma on either side of I think because I kind of interrupted myself. My actual clause was I would like to go to medical school. Okay, so I interrupted that clause to put in this little phrase, I think. So I want to put commas around that so my sentence doesn't look confusing. All right, my next one. I went to Oriental, a small town on the coast of North Carolina, for spring break. Now, same thing, my actual sentence here is I went to Oriental for spring break. Okay, but they decided to interrupt themselves and put in some extra information about Oriental, a small town on the coast of North Carolina. Okay, so they put commas around that interruption to set it off. Okay, so let's take a look at our practice that we have down here. Okay, so our practice is to add commas to the following sentences as needed. So we need to keep looking for those interruptions and trying to set them off with commas. Okay, so let's take number 1. You will find out, I'm sure, that it is a difficult test. So let's try to find kind of what the real sentence, what the main point is that they're trying to make here. So they're basically trying to say you will find out that it is a difficult test. Okay, so you will find out that it is a difficult test. All right, so I'm sure it's kind of an interruption there. It's what they're adding to it, okay? So they're saying you will find out that it's a difficult test, but they interrupted to tell you that they're sure that you're going to find this out, okay? So we want to set that off with commas. All right, now let's take number 2. The Manchurian plain, a large northern plain, gets very cold in the winter. Okay, so same thing. We want to look for what the main thought was, the main clause in our sentence was, okay? So we have the Manchurian plain. Then let's find the verb that goes with it. So it says it gets very cold in the winter. So this a large northern plain is my interruption here. This is where they interrupted themselves to give you more information about the Manchurian plain. Okay, so they interrupted the sentence to tell you it's a large northern plain, so you had more details. Okay, so one more together. Number 3, I don't think, on the other hand, that going on the trip is a good idea. So looking for kind of my main point, right, looking for what they interrupted, I don't think that going on that trip is a good idea, seems to be their main sentence, their clause. And then they interrupted it to say, on the other hand. So I don't think, on the other hand, that going on that trip is a good idea. Okay, now, what I want you to do, take a look at sentences 4 and 5. Look for those interruptions, set them off with commas. All right, hopefully we had a chance to do that. Let's take a look. The dog was, in addition to being cute, very sweet and friendly. All right, so it looks like our main thing they're trying to say is the dog was very sweet and friendly, which we can tell because this in addition, right, we can kind of see they're adding something. This is an addition. So I want to put commas on either side of that. So the dog was, comma, in addition to being cute, comma, very sweet and friendly. They just had to interrupt themselves to tell you more about this cute, sweet dog. All right, number 5. The carrots were, I think, really gross. So it looks like our main thought was the carrots were really gross, okay? And then we kind of set that, I think, off with commas. So this is like you're in an argument about carrots and you interrupt yourself. So the carrots were, I think, really gross, right? So you interrupted yourself to say, this is what I think, okay? All right, so now what I want you to do, you're going to do this independent practice down here, okay? And you're going to be looking for all 4 types of commas, okay? So you need to add commas in a series, so when we list things, in between independent clauses that are joined with the fanboys, after an introductory word, phrase, or dependent clause, or to separate those interruptions out from the rest of the sentence. Okay, so we'll go over this tomorrow. If you're having trouble with it, we're going to do a ton more comma practice. You're going to get a lot more opportunities to work on this, okay? And let me know if you have any questions.